In this episode of Narrative, the True Story, I'm going to tell you probably the most important concept you're ever going to hear about narrative and how it works, and it's called the story mind. Now, you may have heard of it, you may not, but by the end of the program, I'm pretty sure you're going to look at narrative a whole new way and understand how it works in fiction and how that carries over and comes from the real world and our own psychologies, and even how we perceive the laws of physics and how all that's based in biology. Well, it sounds like a bunch of hokum, and I don't expect you to buy it right up front. So we'll take you through it step by step. And if you're with me all the way until the end, you'll find out why I'm wearing this tattered, ridiculous hat. It's very special to me, has nothing to do with narrative, but I'll share that with you at the end just as a little bonus, a treat for listening for the rest of this. Okay. Story mind. What is the story mind? Well, I used to teach this a different way. I said, this is the story mind conceptually in theory. Narrative theory, lightning and thunderbolts, Gandalf. Narrative theory, story mind. Okay, and wow people with it. And I sort of did. It's kind of a cool concept, but unfortunately, it kind of distances you from its touch with reality. So I would take the story mind concept and then I'd begin to connect it to human psychology, and then I'd take it down into fiction, and then all of a sudden we're dealing with that, but we really don't understand the magnificence that is the story mind doing it that way. So I thought I'd try something completely different this time, and you be the judge as to whether you want it the other way. There's plenty of videos I've done on that. Only one like this so far. All right, so story mind. Let's start with us. Everyone, every man, every woman. What kinds of things do we have that every other human being has? And I'm not talking about arms and legs and eyes. You know, if you're built the way the model is, you know, the norm. Okay. I'm talking about internally, in your mind. What do you have? What are the basic elements, traits, attributes that we all share? Well, for one thing, we have self-awareness. We know that we exist. I think, therefore I am. Okay, I think, therefore, so what? Okay, but beyond that, we have logic. We all know that we are able to logically reason things. And as someone once said, that if you start with a premise such as that the moon is made from green cheese, you can logically argue that astronauts should carry crackers. Well, this is true. Logic does not say whether something's true or not. It just says that given the premise where you start, you can say these steps make sense. These steps are not faulty, that if this follows this, then this must follow that. Okay, that's what logic's all about. So we have logic, but what's the counterpoint to logic? We have passion. Passion! Passion. Okay, we've got passion. We all have that. People get mad, sad, happy, loving. We go to war and we sacrifice to help others so that they don't suffer so much. I mean, that's us. We got passion. That's all over. We've got passion. Okay, logic and passion. What else? What else we got? Well, for one thing, skepticism. We all have a healthy sense of skepticism. You know, that we don't buy everything. You know, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck, as the old saying went. You know, it's not green behind the ears. I don't buy everything that I'm told. This is really good in the age of advertising, that you don't just say, oh yeah, sure, they say it, so it must be true. Or on the internet, that like such and such said such and such, and this has been proven to be that, and you look at it and you go, well, yes it has, because you have disconnected your skepticism, and that's something you really don't want to do. On the other hand, you can be overly skeptical, can't you? You know, and you can say, I don't believe it. I don't care. I don't care what information you give me. I don't trust the source. I don't believe it. You haven't made a connection. You know, I wrote something down the other day. It said, let's see if I can remember this right now. You can't successfully argue. You can't successfully argue the negative. Prove me wrong. Okay, so we have skepticism, and the counterpart to skepticism. What is it that we all have? Well, it's faith, it's a belief. If skepticism is maybe doubt, like self-doubt or doubt in a deity, or just not believing the source, where something comes from. I don't care what you say, I'm not going to believe it because I don't trust you. Trust, okay, skepticism. The counterpart is faith or belief, or instead of doubt, maybe confidence, self-confidence in ourselves, belief in a trusted source, or faith there is someone above us or something, some force greater than ourselves. I had a friend once, and they asked him, they said, you're an atheist, aren't you? And he said, no, I'm not an atheist. I don't have enough faith. Because in order to deny something, you have to have as much faith as you do to believe in it. So it's all a matter of faith. But we have those qualities: logic, passion, skepticism, and faith or belief or self-confidence, self-doubt. These are all the qualities that we see that fall into those categories, and there are more. There's lots more, okay? But let's just take these four as an example. We got them all. So you would think that when people would sit down to write a story, back in the old days when they're trying to figure out, I could write about something, and I don't have to just write about what is, but I can write about a hypothetical. Okay, big step forward. Other videos tell you how that came about. But how do you actually get to that point where you start saying, what am I going to write about? Well, you look to the real world and you say, in the real world, I see this happening. Therefore, I will reflect that in my story, okay, in fiction. And if I put it in fiction the way that it happens in the real world, well, then people will believe in my fiction because it mirrors what they see every day, that they know to be true through life experience. Yes. Okay, so they are going to write what they see. And so they write about how people try to figure things out with logic and how passion comes into play. Sometimes our logic and our passion agree. This makes total sense. It's what I want to do. Oh man, are you in Fat City right then, okay? But other times, it doesn't make any sense at all, but it's where your heart tells you to go. And other times, it makes great sense, but now, you don't want to go there, okay? So we all know within ourselves that there are conflict sometimes between logic and passion, but they're not always in disagreement. Sometimes the touchy-feely, holistic view of the universe that we get from our passions, okay, that tells us one thing, and sometimes what we do with our logic when we figure it out step by step comes to the exact same conclusion at the same point. And then we're totally happy, aren't we? Just like you are right now. How could you not be? So, with all this in mind, we've got these traits, they show up in fiction, and they become the conventions of storytelling, because we know if we don't include the logical perspective, anybody looking at our story is going to say, well, why didn't they figure that out? Or if you put in something without the passion, they'll say, yeah, but, the human heart, sometimes you have to let logic go and just follow your heart. That's a story. And other times doesn't matter how it feels. Sometimes you really have to go with what makes sense, because what makes sense, because it turns out that what you feel is actually going to get you into real trouble. Lots of messages you can make. So we're doing all this in stories, and then there's one more thing that happens in the real world that authors put into the conventions of storytelling that became storytelling that became the conventions of storytelling that became narrative structure. And that is that when we get together in groups to a common goal, or with a shared interest in some topic or some process or some activity, fans of a television show, users of Apple computer or Windows, whatever you like, Android, okay, when you're a group like that, or a particular religion, or I'm a Californian, I'm a New Yorker, you go, any group that you come together establishes an identity. And you feel a part of that larger self. And it turns out when we come together for that common purpose or common interest, okay, it sort of self-organizes. And when it self-organizes, somebody emerges as the voice of logic and reason, the voice of reason for that group that's, however, it's self-defining. Somebody else emerges as the heart of the group, the speaker for the passion of the group. Someone else becomes the resident skeptic who, no matter what it is, no, I don't think we're going to be able to do that, at least not this quarter. Or, I just don't buy that as being cut and dried. We need to discuss it, okay? And someone else then becomes the faithful one. I know we can do this. I'm sure of it. Or, I know he hasn't given all the data, but you can trust him. He's a guy who's proven himself before. That's the voice of faith, of confidence, self-confidence. It turns out that in the group, it reflects everything that we are as individuals. There's lots of dynamics I'll talk about in other videos that say, how does somebody emerge as the voice of reason? What if there's three people who want the job? Does one buy it? Does one struggle with the others? Does one have another assassinated so they can do that, or frame them so they look bad so they can have that? And if they have it, does that necessarily mean they're the best person for the job? Not necessarily. And often, more often than it is not. They're not the right person for the job. They're just more capable in working in a social scenario and snagging that job that they want for whatever reason. But mostly we try to get the jobs that we feel comfortable with, because in life we tend to favor some things, like we'd rather be logic than passionate if we can swing it, or we just don't want to take chances, so we doubt things. What is it, Missouri, the show me state? I doubt things until you actually put it in front of me. Show it to me and then I'll believe it. It's like the old saying, it's I'll believe it when I see it, but sometimes it's I'll see it when I believe it. Okay, so this is happening at a larger scale. You can consider it like a fractal of the human mind of a single individual. Each of the members of the group. Each of the members of the group. I just liked saying that twice. That's a nice rhythm to it. Each of the members of the group has all of these traits within them, and they use them in the various narratives of their life. The narrative with their family, the narrative specifically with their children, with their boss at work, with the people at the lodge, with the girls down at the hair salon. When you go to the cosplay convention, you're going to use all of these traits to solve problems, enhance your experience, add more to your life than you had before, find the course of least resistance, try to avoid friction, try to raise yourself and elevate yourself right out of the frame, just like that. Okay, that's what you're going to try to do in real life, because you have hundreds of narratives in your real life. Stories are about all these people with hundreds of narratives, and then one overarching narrative that pertains to the group. That overarching narrative, that group, if it has logic and it has passion, if it has skepticism and it has faith or confidence, well, if it quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's a duck. In other words, it's a human mind. It is a model of a human mind. And all the characters within that large group, all of the people functioning in those roles, they are like the characters in stories. They're facets of the overall mind when they're dealing with the overall issue. So you'll see in stories that there are really two things going on at the same time. Yes, two. Count them, two. Okay. When you're looking at stories, you're not looking at a linearity that has tension and building tension. That's why they've never been able to understand why a structure works, because they're always looking at it in a linear fashion. But that's not how it is. It's a fractal relationship, a wheel within a wheel. Every individual makes up part of these little narratives that are going on. And in those, they have to be complete. They have to have logic and feeling and skepticism and faith and all the others that I'm not mentioning for the sake of time and clarity. All of those things have to be in each one of those individuals, or they don't come off as real people. And we can't get into them and say, I can connect with this person. And that's the first thing you have to have in a fiction, is you got to be able to connect with the people in it. However, each one also carries a mantle. If you're dealing with archetypes, you'll have someone who represents reason, logic, someone who represents feeling and passion, and someone who's skeptic, and someone who's faith, and all the others. Those will be your archetypes. And it turns out there's 8 archetypes. And in another video, I'll explain why there's 8. It's not an arbitrary number. I've got plenty of arbitrary numbers for you. How about 26? Means nothing. But 8 is important because of the fact that there are 8 archetypes for very good reasons we'll talk about elsewhere. But just trust me, right? Have a little faith? Okay. When you've got these 8 archetypes, they represent these balanced 4 sets of 4 pairs of these traits that we have. 4 of those traits look towards the outside world, and 4 of them look back in towards ourselves. We've looked at that in other videos, that we have 2 senses. We have looking out into the, there's me and there's everything else. And when I look at everything else, I'm looking at all the other people and the things and the landslides and the rainstorms and the car accidents, and also at all the other people. And this is how it works. We've got that sense of mass and space and time and energy. And inside ourselves, we have knowledge, thought, ability, and desire. And I just did a video called The Dramatica Quad and the Equation of Mental Relativity. Look it up if you want to know how that works and how it relates to Einstein's relativity, only the internal version, mental relativity. That's pretty cool. But getting back to the case at hand, which is the story mind, we have all of these traits and we use them individually in our own problems. When we come together in the group, we subordinate ourselves as individuals, and we take on these roles. One person represents logic, one represents passion, and so on. And when we do that, then we're functioning as the characters do in a story. That's why they're in the story that way, because writers would look to the real world and say, when people are in these groups, this is what they do. They take on these roles. They don't know it's psychology. They didn't know that it's the fractal level of the great big, the big giant head, the story mind, the psychology of the story itself as if it were a person. They didn't know that. It just happened by observing what they saw in the world. And that's the beauty of it, is that you can look at it. You don't have to search your soul inside to understand how it works. You look outside to see how these people work together as part of a larger group mind, story mind. But you look within yourself to see what it feels like to be a person in one of those positions. So you can step into the shoes of each of your characters when you're writing, and you can get that empathy because you know what it's like, because you've been there before some time or other in some combination of things, and you can cast yourself into that role and say, what would it feel like from here? Okay? When you're trying to, all dramatic tension comes from the dissonance created between what the group is demanding of an individual in his role and the path to the solutions that individual carries within himself to try and solve his own personal problems. So whatever he's trying to deal with his own self and his own life, is in conflict with what he's being required to do by the larger picture, either through social pressure or through a job he's got to accomplish or through responsibilities or whatever. And there's other videos on why we justify these things, why we rationalize, why we accept these responsibilities that we could actually walk away from. What prevents us from doing it? Because physically we could get up and say, nope, sorry, out of here. Why don't we do it? Well, that's another interesting video coming up that I will be discussing the process of justification. But I want to wrap this up without going on forever and ever and ever. I just want to go forever and ever, not one more ever. Makes all the difference. Okay. So, the story mind happens naturally when we all get together towards a common purpose or with a common interest. And when we do, then it takes on an identity. And someone will emerge as the I think therefore I am of the group, whether it's a Steve Jobs who is Apple Computer incarnate, or the President of the United States in one administration or another that we look at, and we either accept that or reject it. We say we're part of that group mind or we're not. Here's our leader. That's not our leader, okay? There is someone who represents what it is to be the ultimate member of that group, and that is that central character, that main character, as we say in fiction, the one that the audience stands in their shoes and says, this is what it's like to be this story mind. That's what main character does for it. It's the character who's the I think, therefore I am. And in stories, you'll find that often that's the same person who's the protagonist driving it forward, like Steve Jobs was. In other stories, you'll find that the character that the audience stands in, like To Kill a Mockingbird, is not the protagonist. The protagonist is Atticus in To Kill a Mockingbird, the Gregory Peck part in the movie, the Southern lawyer trying to prevent a black man who was wrongly accused of raping a white girl, to prevent him from being lynched and to get him a fair trial. He's the protagonist. But the story is told through the eyes of Scout, his young daughter. And we see all of that prejudice through her eyes, and we experience the meaning of it in her story as the story mind belongs to her at that level of I think, therefore I am. She is the identity. Scout is the identity of To Kill a Mockingbird, not Atticus. He's one of the important players, one of the important characters, and that is how stories are built. But often we put them together and create the stereotypical hero, where you have one person leading the charge and also dealing with the internal issues or the passionate issue or the moral issue, having to make a choice, leap of faith, all of that. That's main character stuff, not protagonist stuff. Protagonist is the guy leading the charge in the story, the one who's the head of the plot, you might say, and the one who's the head of the theme about what's the proper way to go about things. That's the main character, and they're often put together in the same player, but they don't have to be, and then you get a lot more versatility. Well, again, there's also more versatility because there's 8 archetypes, but each one can be broken down into 8 elements, and that's where you get to what we did in the last video, the periodic table of story elements, where you start seeing the building blocks of what make up these archetypes, and they fall into families, and each of the 8 archetypes is a different family of elements. That's why they have similar traits, like chlorine and fluorine have similar traits in a family in the periodic table of elements in chemistry. So, okay, there you have an idea about it. It's the story mind. It's the fact there's 2 psychologies, and it's how they twist and turn, wheels within wheels, okay? How they move around each other that alters the dissonance and the ebb and the flow. If you were to take the amount of tension that's created as the outside story mind is wrapping around the main character and all the other characters who are trying to look out for themselves, that's going to create waveforms if you measured it. And that waveform is the rising and falling tension line of a story, of a narrative. It's not something that comes from the linearity. It's a linearity that is projected out of the rising and falling tension lines as that story mind tries to find the combination lock to put all the pieces together so that it all works both for the people and the story too, the larger story mind. That's what it's all about. And that's where we get the greatest satisfaction in stories, is when we accomplish that at the end. Then we're all happy because we begin to believe that maybe in our own lives we can find solutions that will satisfy what we need to do for ourselves and also what we need to do in our social extended world in that story mind we belong in regard to a particular narrative of our lives. All right. So I'll tell you about this hat now. This hat has been with me every time I've gone on the John Muir Trail. And I've been doing that since 2003, 20 years. You know, I didn't even start until I was like 50, okay? But I've been on the John Muir Trail in various section hikes, some of them several times over, like the trip over Donahue Pass at 11,000 feet. I've done that 4 times now? 3, 4? I don't know. But Ansel Adams Wilderness, the Minarets, all those areas, I just love that area. Red's Meadow, when you've been out on a trail for 10 days, carrying everything you need on your back. This hat has been with me on every single trip I've ever made on the John Muir Trail. It doesn't protect me much anymore from sun or rain or anything else. I'm not sure I can take it again. I'm planning a trip for next year in my 71st year to go back out on trail and camp in the wilderness for a bunch of days at a time. And so today I was walking around the backyard. I was trying to look at it as hiking. We've made a nice kind of, it feels like being out in the wilderness. We've got trees after several years that have grown up nice and large and grassy areas, and we even have a little winding trail we call the John Muir Trail that our kitty follows that path to go to the door, and he actually follows the curves we put into the trail instead of going straight through. It's so cute. Okay, so anyway, I was walking around doing this, trying to hit the mileage I want to hit today. I'm up to 3.5 miles a day walking around the backyard, okay? I'm going for 5, and if I can maintain 5 for a while, then, you know, in a few months, I think I'm going to be ready to start getting out on the trail again and camping out. And I wear this hat to remind me of those experiences as I walk around the backyard. And today I was wearing it, and I started thinking, well, yeah, I want to do this video on the story mind, but how am I going to go? You know, I could do it this way. Yeah, I could do it that way. You know, I could say this. I could say that. Okay? And suddenly I realized, by God, this is the time to do it when I'm full of vim and vinegar. Okay, so that's it for now. The story mind, you get the idea. I'll be back with many more videos, God help you, that will deal with lots of specifics about the story mind and different aspects of it, how it works, plus narrative mechanics in general, the Dramatica theory of story, of which I am the co-creator. Okay, we will go into all of these things as I create more videos, as long as I'm still alive and kicking, because I love sharing it with you. Okay, that's it. Bye-bye. See you next time.